Margaret Ellis wasn't dressed like power. She didn't walk in with heels clicking or assistants trailing. No pearl necklace, no leather bag, no designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Just worn sneakers, a soft gray sweater, and jeans that had seen better days. She moved quietly, her steps measured, her gaze observant. To the staff and shoppers inside store number 89, a flagship boutique in downtown Chicago, she was nobody. And that was exactly what she wanted them to think. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. What they didn't know was that Margaret Ellis owned the very ground they were standing on. She was the founder and CEO of Ellis Emporium, Inc., a $3.2 billion retail empire that had changed the face of American fashion. But today, Margaret wasn't here for celebration. She was here because 3 anonymous letters had landed on her desk, each one painting the same ugly picture: discrimination, classism, and something worse, a culture of cruelty hidden behind polished glass and soft jazz. Now, at 10:43 a.m. on a brisk Tuesday, she was stepping into her own store under false assumptions and quiet intent. She had no security detail, no camera crew, just a phone in her pocket quietly recording, and a growing weight in her chest that told her something was about to go very wrong. She had seen this before. 60 years old now, Margaret had lived through the indignities of Jim Crow, survived corporate boardrooms where she was the only black woman for 2 decades, and built her empire in a world that never handed her anything. She hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be followed in stores. She remembered being asked to leave nice restaurants without a menu, to show ID when nobody else had to. She hadn't dressed down today to prove a point. She dressed like herself, the same way she had dressed before the Forbes covers, before the TED Talks, before the luxury conferences where CEOs swapped power like business cards. And that was what made what happened next so chilling. She was just beginning her inspection, checking the layout, observing staff-customer interactions, making quiet notes in her mind, when she heard the voice. A sharp, syrupy tone, wrapped in the kind of customer service smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Ma'am, can I help you find the Goodwill? It's a few blocks east." Margaret turned slowly, calmly, and met the eyes of Danielle Foster, the store manager. Blonde, tailored, confident. The kind of woman who didn't ask questions, she made judgments. Her smirk was polished, her tone precise. Margaret saw it all in one glance: the arrogance, the assumption, the microaggression dressed as hospitality. And just like that, the stage was set. What Danielle didn't realize, and what no one in that store had even considered, was that Margaret Ellis wasn't lost, confused, or browsing above her means. She was the owner of everything within those walls. The dresses on the racks, her designs, the marble floors, chosen by her architects, the sales strategies, developed by her team. But none of that protected her from what was about to unfold. Because in this store, that day, it wasn't about money. It was about appearance. And Danielle had already decided that Margaret didn't belong. Shoppers began to glance over, sensing tension but not yet understanding it. Staff paused, some whispering. Danielle saw the audience and leaned in, her voice louder now, condescending as ever. "We cater to a more refined clientele here. Some of these pieces cost more than rent." Margaret didn't flinch. She'd faced worse in boardrooms and back alleys. But as Danielle circled her like a vulture in silk heels, it became clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a performance, and everyone was watching. No one had any idea that their laughter, their nods, their silence would soon echo back at them in ways they never expected. Phones would be lifted, reputations would crumble, and what began as a routine store visit would soon become a national reckoning. But for now, They thought they were just putting a nobody in her place. They were dead wrong. Margaret Ellis wasn't just somebody, she was the somebody. And she'd come not just to inspect, but to expose. Danielle Foster had always believed she could read people in a single glance. Over the years, she'd made it her personal brand, the ability to spot class the moment someone stepped through the door. It wasn't written on a resume, and it didn't appear on performance reviews, but it's what had earned her quiet nods from corporate, glowing praise from wealthy clients, and 3 separate internal awards for brand consistency. At 39, Danielle was the undisputed queen of store number 89, a flagship boutique nestled in one of Chicago's wealthiest shopping districts. Her wardrobe was curated down to the stitch. Her perfume, imported French jasmine, was sprayed in 3 delicate dabs, one on each wrist, one behind the neck. Her shoes, always heels, always polished. Even on off days, she dressed like the store window mannequins. Sleek, calculated, perfect. And she demanded the same standard from everyone around her. It was 10:48 a.m. when she first noticed Margaret Ellis, though, of course, she didn't know her name yet. To Danielle, the woman who had wandered into her store that morning was simply a problem. The clothes didn't match the glass chandelier lighting. The sneakers didn't belong on her imported Brazilian oak floors. The cardigan looked like it had been folded in a laundry basket, not dry cleaned. The wallet, peeking slightly from a canvas bag, had visible duct tape along one corner. Danielle's smile flickered into place like an actor stepping on stage. But it wasn't genuine. It was the well-rehearsed smirk of someone who believed they were doing the store, and society at large, a service by filtering out the wrong kind of visitor. She began her approach. The store was quiet. A Tuesday lull. Only a handful of shoppers milled about. A young couple trying on scarves, a middle-aged businessman browsing watches, and of course Lillian Reed, the 66-year-old white woman who had been shopping here for over a decade and spent, on average, $12,000 a month. Lillian was examining a silk blouse when she noticed Danielle straighten up and adjust her walk. She recognized the posture. Danielle was on the prowl. Danielle took long, deliberate strides toward Margaret, each step designed to say, "I'm in control." She didn't open with a warm welcome or a simple, "Can I help you?" number. That wasn't her style. Instead, with a voice sweet enough to rot teeth, she offered, "Oh, hello there. Looking for the Goodwill? It's a few blocks east." The sentence floated into the air with the subtle weight of a slap. Margaret, her back to Danielle, slowly turned. Her eyes were calm, her face unreadable. She didn't blink, she didn't bristle. She just smiled. A knowing, almost serene expression that didn't match the insult that had just been lobbed at her. Danielle wasn't prepared for that smile. It threw her off, ever so slightly, like a pianist hitting a wrong note in an otherwise flawless piece. "No," Margaret replied evenly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." There was no sarcasm, no challenge, just certainty. It irritated Danielle. People who didn't belong weren't supposed to have that kind of poise. She glanced toward the register where Angela Ruiz, 26, was folding merchandise. Angela had paused mid-sleeve roll. Her eyes darted between Margaret and Danielle, but she said nothing. Like most staff in the store, Angela knew the rules weren't written down, but they were enforced. Appearances mattered. Loyalty mattered more. Danielle stepped closer. "Sweetie," she began, emphasizing the word with a false kindness that practically dripped venom. "This isn't a clearance outlet. These aren't yard sale prices. Some of our pieces cost more than your car is worth." From the jewelry counter, Tommy Brennan, 32, glanced up and smirked. He didn't know who Margaret was either, but he had watched Danielle use this tone before, It was her signature. The customers she deemed unworthy never stayed long. They were subtly shamed, turned around, made to feel small until they slinked out. But Margaret didn't slink. She moved calmly toward a glass display of leather handbags, her handbags, though no one else knew that yet, and examined the stitching with the casual focus of someone who'd spent decades choosing fabrics and sourcing leather. Danielle followed like a shadow. She leaned in again, this time letting her voice rise just enough for other customers to hear. "Oh, darling, that bag costs more than most people pay in rent for 6 months. You sure you wouldn't be more comfortable looking over at the accessories wall? The imitation ones?" Behind her, Lillian Reed chuckled under her breath. Danielle caught it and smirked. That was the encouragement she needed. The show had begun. One by one, other customers started to notice. Phones didn't come out yet, but heads turned. People began pretending to shop while eavesdropping with trained curiosity, the way Americans do when they suspect drama is about to unfold. Even Carlos Rivera, the 31-year-old security guard standing near the entrance, perked up and shifted his weight. Margaret still said nothing. She adjusted her glasses and continued browsing. This silent dignity began to unnerve Danielle. She was used to control. She was used to customers stammering, apologizing, leaving. But this woman, with her taped-up wallet and worn sneakers, wasn't playing her role. Danielle pivoted toward the VIP section, a private alcove roped off near the back where only approved clients were allowed to try on dresses that ran into the thousands. "I suppose you'd like to try one of these on, too?" she asked, mocking. "We do require a credit card pre-authorization, just to make sure no one gets any ideas." A gasp rippled quietly from a nearby woman holding a designer clutch. Margaret looked up and locked eyes with Danielle for the first time since the insult began. Her expression was still soft. No fire, just something. Steady, collected, dangerous in its restraint. And then Margaret said something that changed the tone entirely. "Yes, I'd like to try that one." She pointed to a deep emerald dress displayed under a spotlight, a $4,600 exclusive from the winter collection. Danielle laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a cruel one. She turned to the room like a game show host announcing a punchline. "Everyone, this lady would like to try on our emerald gown, the one with imported beadwork and hand-stitched lining, a stunning choice if you've got the income to match." Several shoppers snorted. One man muttered, "She must be lost." Another whispered, "Maybe she's doing research for a school play." Angela Ruiz's hands trembled slightly. She wanted to say something, but her paycheck and her son's daycare depended on her silence. Even Carlos, the security guard, looked unsure now. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't stepping in either. The unwritten rule was clear. Follow Danielle's lead. Danielle stepped in again, ready for her next line. "Before we embarrass ourselves, should I tell her we require a financial check for fitting room access?" Margaret didn't answer. She simply turned her head toward the display mirror, adjusted her posture, and smiled again. It wasn't smug, it wasn't confrontational. It was the smile of a woman who had been here before, not in this store, but in this situation. And it was the smile of a woman who had already decided exactly how this would end. Danielle didn't see it. Not yet, but she would. And soon, the whole store would. Because assumptions are funny things. They reveal more about the person making them than the person being judged. And Danielle Foster was about to learn, in the most public, most unforgettable way, just how wrong a first glance can be. Margaret Ellis had spent a lifetime walking through rooms where she wasn't expected, wanted, or welcomed. She'd mastered the art of grace under pressure, But even with all her years of boardroom battles, political donor dinners, and corporate backroom negotiations, what happened next inside store number 89 wasn't business. It was personal. Danielle Foster had crossed a line. No longer content to quietly nudge Margaret toward the exit with snide remarks and condescension, the store manager had shifted into full performance mode. With several customers now glancing curiously in their direction, Danielle saw an opportunity to not just remove this undesirable, but to make an example of her. The moment Margaret pointed to the emerald green gown in the VIP section, the one Danielle had mockingly said she'd never afford, something in Danielle snapped into place. Her face lit up with smug certainty, the kind that only comes from a person who's absolutely convinced they're untouchable. She turned to the room like a stage actress in the final act of a Broadway play. "Attention, everyone," she announced, gesturing grandly toward Margaret. "This guest would like to try on our $4,600 emerald gown from the new winter line." The store fell quiet. Conversation ceased. Silk hangers stopped sliding. Even the soft instrumental music playing overhead seemed to recede. Danielle's voice echoed through the boutique like a bell in a chapel, clear, theatrical, and dripping with sarcasm. "Just so we're all clear," she continued, "we do require a credit check for VIP fittings. We like to protect the integrity of our pieces." A ripple of laughter broke through the silence. Not raucous, but sharp. Quiet chuckles, mutters. The kind of stifled amusement people allow themselves when they think someone else is safe to mock. Lillian Reed, standing near the scarf display, chuckled audibly and leaned toward another customer, whispering something behind her hand. A woman in heels murmured, "That's bold." A man in a navy suit snorted, "She's brave, I'll give her that." Angela Ruiz, behind the register, froze. She felt her stomach tighten with shame, the kind of deep, coiled discomfort that made her want to step in and say something. But she didn't. She couldn't. Her paycheck and her son's weekly medication depended on keeping her mouth shut. Margaret, meanwhile, stood calm, centered, composed. Her hands rested gently at her sides. She didn't shift or step back. She didn't lower her gaze or fidget with her sweater. Instead, she looked at the gown, and then at Danielle, and said without raising her voice, "I'd still like to try it on." That quiet confidence should have ended the show. But for Danielle, it was fuel. She clapped her hands once, mockingly. "Incredible," she said. "I haven't had this much excitement since the semi-annual sale." She turned again to the store's patrons. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's a reminder that dreams are free, but our merchandise, not so much." Another round of giggles. Even Amber Davis, the 24-year-old cashier who idolized Danielle, giggled behind her hand and whispered to a colleague, "She's hilarious." Danielle, emboldened, turned back to Margaret. "But while you're here, maybe we can help you find something a little more appropriate." She gestured toward the accessory wall, something in the $20 range, earrings maybe, or a keychain. Someone near the dressing room snorted, "The clearance bin is right over there." Then came the moment that tipped it from mockery to humiliation. Danielle took a single step closer to Margaret, tilted her head and said, "Tell me something. When was the last time you walked into a place like this and felt like you actually belonged?" Margaret didn't answer. Not because she couldn't, but because she knew that was the moment Danielle wanted to break her. Silence was her resistance. The air in the boutique had grown thick, like before a thunderstorm. But instead of lightning, it was shame crackling just beneath the surface. It didn't belong to Margaret. It belonged to everyone else. Danielle wasn't finished. She reached toward Margaret's tote bag. "Store policy," she said with a fake smile. "May I see inside your purse?" We've had some issues before." The implication hung in the air like rot. Even customers who had been chuckling earlier froze. This wasn't funny anymore. This was accusation. Margaret, still calm, slowly opened her bag and handed it over. Danielle rifled through it with performative flair, like a TSA agent at the gate with an audience. Keys, hand sanitizer, a cloth napkin, a small worn leather wallet held together with a strip of gray duct tape. Danielle held it up like a dirty tissue. "This," she said, spinning to face the onlookers, "is what trying to shop above your station looks like." Gasps, laughter, snapping photos. It was a circus now. Lillian Reed muttered, "Poor woman probably saved up just to window shop." Another voice said, "She's probably using coupons at McDonald's." Amber Davis clapped her hands and said, "Miss Foster's so good at protecting the store's image." Carlos Rivera, the security guard, had now stepped away from the door. He stood nearby, arms folded, watching everything unfold. He didn't intervene. Danielle handed the wallet back with 2 fingers, like it was something sticky. "Let me do you a favor," she said, voice low and slow. "There's a discount outlet 3 blocks away. I'm sure they'll have something more, aligned with your lifestyle." The phrase, "your lifestyle," hit like a slap. And then Danielle did slap, literally. It was so fast that no one caught it until the sound cracked through the air. A sharp, humiliating smack across Margaret's cheek. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to echo. Time froze. Every person in that store, the shoppers, the employees, the bystanders, suddenly understood they'd just witnessed something that couldn't be undone. The energy drained from the room like air from a punctured tire. No one moved. Danielle stood with her hand still raised, eyes wide, chest heaving slightly. The adrenaline of someone who had just crossed a line she didn't even know existed. Her smirk had vanished. It had been replaced with the flushed face of a woman who didn't realize she'd just ended her career in a single act. Margaret lifted her hand to her cheek, gently. Not out of pain, but almost like she was confirming that, yes, this had actually happened. Yeah. The room held its breath. Then Danielle broke the silence. "Security will escort you out now," she said, her voice sharp again, reclaiming her faux authority. "So our real customers can shop in peace." Carlos stepped forward, not quickly, not confidently. He didn't want this job anymore, but he did as he was told. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, a gauntlet of silent judgment. A few shoppers looked away, suddenly unsure of their earlier laughter. One woman lowered her phone. Another man whispered, "We might have gone too far." Margaret didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't plead or raise her voice. She turned, adjusted her bag, and walked steadily toward the exit. But before she reached the door, she paused and looked back once, not at Danielle, but at the entire store. No words, just a look. It said everything. It said, "I saw you." It said, "I remember your faces." It said, "This isn't over." And it wasn't. Because even as champagne was poured and Danielle celebrated with her inner circle, Margaret was stepping out into the fresh Chicago air and making a phone call that would shake this boutique to its foundations. What Danielle had mistaken for victory was actually the beginning of the end. And for store number 89, the reckoning had just begun. The door closed behind Margaret Ellis with a soft thud, one that somehow felt louder than the slap that had just echoed through the boutique moments earlier. Inside store number 89, laughter still lingered in the air. Danielle Foster, flushed from the adrenaline of her own performance, poured champagne into tall flutes with the flourish of a show host basking in a standing ovation. The rest of the staff, Angela Ruiz, still pale, Amber Davis, practically glowing, and Tommy Brennan, all false bravado, hovered around like backup dancers who'd nailed their routine. Lillian Reed sipped slowly, clearly enjoying the aftermath. Some customers lingered, eager to be part of the story they'd likely retell at dinner parties or brunch tables. You wouldn't believe what happened at the boutique today. It was savage, but honestly, that woman had no business being there. None of them saw the real story walking across the parking lot. Margaret didn't storm out. She didn't pace or cry or crumble. She moved with deliberate calm, every step measured like a judge approaching the bench. Her cheek still held the sting from Danielle's hand. But it wasn't pain that powered her now. It was purpose. Quiet, focused, inevitable. She reached into her canvas tote, the same one that Danielle had ridiculed, and pulled out a slim silver phone. Her fingers moved smoothly across the screen. She didn't hesitate, didn't scroll. She dialed from memory. It was answered on the second ring. "James," she said, her voice low, steady. "It's Margaret, code black, store 89, immediate dispatch, legal, HR, security. I want everyone here within the hour." A pause. She nodded once, eyes still trained on the boutique's glass doors. "And James," she added, "bring the ownership papers. All of them. Originals, signed copies, digital archives. I want no room for doubt." Another pause. "Yes. This will be the last time we ever deal with this." She ended the call and slid the phone back into her bag. Then she just stood there, outside the boutique that bore her family name on the lease, watching. Through the large storefront windows she could see Danielle animatedly recounting the altercation, gesturing dramatically as the crowd around her chuckled and nodded. Champagne bubbles danced in flutes. Amber was pointing toward the dress Margaret had asked to try on, giggling with another employee. Angela was pretending to smile, but her hands trembled as she stacked glasses. Carlos, the security guard, leaned by the entrance, posture rigid, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Margaret's face didn't change, but behind her calm demeanor, something ancient stirred. Not rage, not vengeance. Something deeper, something earned. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a second phone, one she used only for corporate operations. She typed out a message and hit send. Then she turned her attention back to the store and waited. Minutes passed. Inside, Danielle leaned back against the counter with a glass of champagne and toasted to her unmatched leadership. She smirked at her reflection in a nearby mirror, adjusting a strand of blonde hair behind her ear like a news anchor preparing for camera. "I swear," she was saying to a group of customers, "these people walk in thinking they can just play dress-up. I mean, we have standards for a reason. The brand has to mean something." Lillian Reed nodded emphatically. "You handled it perfectly, dear, elegant, direct, and completely professional. You've protected the integrity of this store." Angela said nothing. Neither did Carlos. But silence, in that moment, was complicity. Then it happened. At exactly 3:47 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into the boutique's parking lot, moving in formation like a motorcade. They parked in front of the store without hesitation. Their engines shut off simultaneously. The doors opened, and from each vehicle emerged a sharply dressed figure in a dark, tailored suit. From the first car, Rachel Dorsey, Director of Human Resources for Ellis Emporium. Known across the company for her no-nonsense approach to ethics and compliance, Rachel had terminated senior executives for lesser infractions. From the second, Michael Harrell, Chief Legal Officer. The man who had once overseen a multi-million-dollar international arbitration in Tokyo without blinking. From the third, Sarah Chen, Chief Operating Officer of the entire Ellis Emporium brand, a woman as precise as she was powerful, who had built 5 regional divisions and tripled store profits nationwide. They didn't walk, they marched. Behind them followed 3 legal aides, 2 security personnel, and Margaret Ellis herself, now dressed in a navy blue blazer and pearl earrings, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked like exactly what she was, a titan, but the quiet kind, the kind whose presence made room shift without her needing to speak. As they entered the boutique, the shift in energy was instantaneous. Conversations stopped. Champagne glasses were lowered. Every eye turned toward the door. Danielle's smile, still painted on her face, froze. She straightened quickly, assuming this must be some surprise audit or impromptu regional review. She stepped forward confidently, speaking in her most polished voice. "Welcome. You've arrived at the perfect moment. I just resolved a bit of customer confusion. Handled it flawlessly, if I say so myself." Rachel Dorsey didn't return the smile. "Miss Foster," she said coolly, "step aside." Danielle blinked. The tension in the room was thick now, but she couldn't read it. Not yet. Michael Harrell scanned the room, noting the open champagne, the half-full glasses, the cluster of employees. Sarah Chen examined the store layout, her gaze falling briefly on the emerald dress, still in the display case. Margaret said nothing. Not yet. "Can someone explain why we received 15 videos, 3 live-streamed clips, and a corporate ethics flag all within the last hour?" Rachel asked, her tone still level, but with an edge that could cut steel. Danielle's mouth opened, then closed. "Well," she began. "If this is about the woman earlier—" "It is," Rachel interrupted. "And before you embarrass yourself further, I'd like you to meet her." She turned slightly, and Margaret Ellis stepped forward into the center of the room. Dead silence. Danielle's jaw dropped. Her skin lost color so fast it looked like the blood had been vacuumed from her face. Amber gasped audibly. Angela froze in place, lips parted. Margaret spoke now, not loudly, not angrily, but with surgical precision. "Danielle Foster," she said. "I am Margaret Ellis. The woman you slapped. The woman you humiliated. The woman you tried to remove from her own store." A single customer dropped their glass. It hit the floor with a shattering crash, but no one flinched. All eyes remained locked on the woman at the center of the storm. Danielle stumbled backward. I didn't know. You didn't look like—" "Like what?" Margaret asked. "Like someone who deserved human decency." Danielle opened her mouth again, but no words came. What could she possibly say? Margaret turned her gaze to the rest of the room. "You all participated," she said, "actively or silently. You laughed, you judged, you filmed. You thought I was nothing, and so you treated me like nothing. But here's the truth." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I've built this company with the belief that character matters more than clothing. That you treat every soul who walks through our doors like they matter, because they do." No one moved. "You failed that standard today, and there will be consequences." Rachel Dorsey nodded. "Effective immediately, Miss Foster, you are terminated. Your security credentials are revoked. You are banned from all Ellis Emporium properties permanently." 2 security officers stepped forward. Danielle, still too shocked to resist, didn't argue. She handed over her badge and name tag with trembling hands. Margaret didn't look at her again. "Amber Davis and Angela Ruiz," Rachel continued, "report to HR for further review. Tommy Brennan, same. As for customers who participated in the mockery, store policy grants us full discretion to refuse service. Those names will be recorded and your profiles flagged." One woman tried to slip quietly out the side door, She didn't make it. Margaret turned one final time to the group. "This isn't just about one store," she said. "This is about a culture we allowed to grow, one I now intend to tear out by the root." And with that, Margaret Ellis turned and walked behind the counter, the very place she'd been banished from hours earlier, and looked around not as a guest, but as the rightful owner. The turning point had come. And now, everything would change. It was as if time itself held its breath. Danielle Foster stood frozen in the center of store number 89, the edges of her carefully constructed world unraveling in real time. Her once impeccable posture now slumped slightly, like a sail collapsing when the wind disappears. Just minutes earlier, she had been basking in applause, pouring champagne in celebration of what she believed to be a job well done. But now, under the searing stare of Margaret Ellis, the founder and owner and lifeblood of the very company she worked for, she could barely keep her knees from buckling. The staff and customers who had been so quick to clap, laugh, and whisper their approval were now paralyzed by shame, fear, or both. The champagne flutes on the counter still shimmered under the boutique lighting, but no one dared touch them. They might as well have been filled with poison. Margaret hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. The weight of the truth hit harder than any shouting ever could. Rachel Dorsey, the Director of Human Resources, stood firm beside Margaret like a prosecutor preparing her final arguments. The legal team, once in the background, now moved deliberately through the store, taking photos, noting faces, recording customer names, and quietly collecting statements. It was no longer a boutique, it was a scene. And in that moment, it didn't matter how expensive the merchandise was, or how carefully curated the space had been. The atmosphere was no longer luxury. It was liability. Margaret took a step forward. Her heels echoed softly on the polished floor. "For the last 3 hours," she began, her voice even and precise, "this store has operated in violation of nearly every standard I've built my name on. And every single person who stood by and let it happen, you are part of the problem." Her words didn't just hang in the air, they punched through it. Angela Ruiz, still standing behind the cash register, visibly trembled. Her eyes welled up. She had said nothing during the mockery, but she had said nothing to stop it either. And now, as the gravity of that choice became clear, her lips began to quiver. "Miss Ellis," she began softly, "please, I didn't mean to—" Margaret held up a hand. "I don't need apologies," she said. "I need accountability." She turned to Rachel, who nodded once, clipboard in hand. "Angela Ruiz," Rachel announced, "you are hereby terminated for failure to report and participation through complicity. You will receive your final check via certified mail. Your badge and access credentials, please." Angela sobbed openly now. Her hands fumbled as she pulled off her lanyard and name tag, laying them gently on the counter like she was placing a child down for a nap. "I have a son," she whispered. "This job paid for his insulin." Margaret's face softened, but only for a breath. "Then you, of all people, should have known better than to stay silent." Amber Davis was next. The youngest on staff, just 24. She had clapped, cheered, and even made snide remarks while Margaret was being publicly humiliated. Now she stood with her hands clutched tightly in front of her, mascara streaking her cheeks. "I didn't know who you were," she cried. "We thought, she told us, you were just—" "Just what?" Margaret asked, tilting her head. "Just someone you could dehumanize." Rachel didn't wait. Amber Davis terminated immediately. "Your remarks were recorded on at least 3 phones, and your participation in the abuse is fully documented." Amber collapsed into a stool near the perfume display and buried her face in her hands. Margaret turned next to Tommy Brennan, who had lingered at the edge of the confrontation, smirking, nodding, never stepping in. "And you, Mr. Brennan?" Margaret asked. "What was your role?" He shifted uneasily. "I didn't say anything," he offered weakly. "Exactly," she replied. Rachel's voice rang out again. "Thomas Brennan. Suspended pending further review. You'll report to HR for mandatory bias and conduct training, effective immediately." Then came Carlos Rivera, the security guard who had followed Danielle's orders without question, the man who had stood in Margaret's path like a bouncer at a nightclub, as if protecting something sacred from contamination. "Carlos," Margaret said, her tone gentler now. "You looked right at me. You knew what was happening. Why didn't you step in?" He looked down at his shoes. "Because I was scared, and because I thought she was in charge." Margaret nodded slowly. Sometimes silence is louder than a shout. Rachel consulted her notes. "Mr. Rivera, reassigned to administrative review, access suspended until cleared by internal compliance." And then she turned to the customers. The people who had laughed, who had whispered, who had raised glasses and taken videos. Some of them were trying to inch toward the exit now, as if hoping invisibility might follow regret. But there was no hiding from this. "You aren't employees," Margaret said, "but that doesn't mean you're blameless. You supported cruelty. You enabled it. You treated another human being like a punchline." A middle-aged man in a blue vest tried to speak. "We didn't know it was you," he said weakly. Margaret looked him dead in the eye. "That's not the point. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like I mattered." Rachel raised her voice now. "The following customers are hereby banned from all Ellis Emporium properties for conduct that violates our Code of Dignity and Customer Decency standards." Names were read, people flushed. A woman gasped and said, "But I've shopped here for years." "And now you won't," Rachel replied without missing a beat. Margaret took a slow breath. "Effective immediately," she declared. "Store number 89 is closing for internal review. All staff are relieved of duty pending new leadership appointments and training. A full audit of store culture will begin tomorrow. There will be no exceptions, no second chances." Sarah Chen stepped forward now. Her voice was like steel dipped in ice. "We will also be issuing a public statement. Legal has cleared the footage for release. The story will be told, unedited, unfiltered, and unforgiving." Danielle, still rooted in place, tried one last time to speak. "Miss Ellis, Margaret, I didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't know who you were. I was protecting the brand. I was doing what I thought you wanted." Margaret turned to her fully now. She walked until only a few inches separated them. "Danielle," she said softly, "if you honestly believe that what happened here today reflects the values I built this company on, then you never knew me, and you never belonged here." There was no rage in her voice, no cruelty, just quiet finality. Danielle lowered her eyes. For the first time in years, she had no words, only silence. Margaret turned back to the rest of the store. This was never just about one woman in worn shoes and a taped wallet. This was about all the people who've been turned away, judged, and demeaned for not fitting into some imagined picture of worth. She glanced at the shattered champagne glass on the floor, then back to the crowd. "This isn't luxury. This isn't excellence. This is rot. And it ends now." With that, she nodded to Rachel. "Shut it down." The lights dimmed slightly as the boutique's systems went into closure mode. Electronic locks beeped. The music cut out. The register displays went dark. It was over. The reckoning had come. And when it did, it didn't arrive with fury or fists, but with dignity, Silence and truth that struck harder than thunder. They had laughed. They had clapped. They had sipped champagne as if they were celebrating a new product launch or the close of a successful quarter. Instead, they had unknowingly toasted the end of their careers, reputations, and, in some cases, their dignity. When Margaret Ellis shut down store number 89, she didn't simply flip a switch or hang a "closed for inventory" sign on the door. No, her closure was surgical, strategic, public, and above all, unforgiving. The boutique went dark in stages. First, the lights above the VIP fitting area dimmed, flickering like a dying candle. Then the sound system, which had once played soft jazz to elevate the atmosphere, clicked off, leaving only the hum of silence and the weight of what had just transpired. The register screens blacked out. Card readers froze. A final beep echoed as the security system activated a lockdown protocol typically reserved for theft emergencies or civil unrest. This was neither. This was reckoning, corporate style. Danielle Foster stood off to the side now, her arms crossed over her chest, but not in confidence, in a futile attempt to brace against the cold realization that she had lost everything: her employment, her status, her carefully manufactured image of being irreplaceable. One moment, she was queen of the boutique. The next, she was just a name on a termination document signed in real time by the very woman she had dared to slap. Her staff, or rather, former staff, were quiet now, some crying, others stunned into silence. Amber Davis had crumpled into a corner, knees pulled to her chest like a child in time-out. Angela Ruiz sat with her head in her hands, mumbling prayers between choked sobs. Tommy Brennan leaned against the jewelry case, trying to catch his breath, his cocky grin from earlier nowhere in sight. And the customers? Gone. Some had left the moment Rachel Dorsey read their names aloud. Others lingered awkwardly before slipping out through the front entrance, now guarded by Ellis Emporium security officers who scanned IDs and license plates, logging them permanently into a blacklist database. Not even online orders would go through for them now. They were ghosts in the system, exiled from luxury they had once used to mock strangers. Inside, Margaret Ellis didn't gloat. She didn't grandstand. She didn't even smile. She simply observed. She had delivered the message, and now she was watching her company enforce it with the precision of a seasoned general. This wasn't vengeance. It was housekeeping. Rachel Dorsey, clipboard in hand, moved like a surgeon through the wreckage. "Staff email credentials have been deactivated," she said aloud, addressing the remaining employees. "Company phones, if issued, are to be left on the counter before you exit. You will be escorted one at a time to collect personal belongings under observation." Carlos Rivera, the security guard who had remained largely silent, approached slowly. "Ma'am," he said softly to Margaret, "I don't know what to say. I followed the manager's orders. I didn't feel I had a choice." Margaret looked at him. "You always have a choice," she said. "And today you chose fear over integrity. That comes with consequences." Carlos lowered his gaze. Rachel's voice was firm again. "Mr. Rivera, you are suspended pending reassignment review. If cleared, you may reapply for a lower-tier position in internal logistics, but not in security, not in customer service, not anywhere public-facing." Carlos simply nodded. There was no point arguing. He wasn't the victim. He knew that. In the background, the legal team began boxing up documents, employee logs, and surveillance footage. None of this would be hidden. Ellis Emporium wasn't going to bury this incident. They were going to broadcast it. Margaret turned to Sarah Chen, the company's chief operating officer. "Get the PR team on standby," she said. "We go live at 5 p.m. Central. Statement first, footage second. Unedited. Let the world see what happened here." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. "Are you sure? It'll damage the brand." "No," Margaret interrupted. "It will strengthen it. Because the brand isn't made of marble floors and imported scarves. It's made of values. And if those values don't survive this moment, then they never meant anything to begin with." It was the kind of statement that made a person sit up straighter, the kind that reminded the board, the press, and every other store manager across the country that Margaret Ellis didn't play defense. She led from the front, even when it hurt. She turned back toward Danielle now, who stood alone, leaning against a pillar like a statue waiting for demolition. "You could have stopped this," Margaret said, her voice calm. "You could have chosen kindness, even once, even in silence. But you chose humiliation. You weaponized your power, not to protect the store, but to protect your ego." Danielle opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat tightened around some half-formed excuse or perhaps an apology that never arrived. She simply looked at the woman she had misjudged and now feared, a woman whose shoes she had once mocked. "Danielle," Margaret continued, "you weren't fired for a single mistake. You were fired because you built a culture of cruelty. You trained your team to behave this way, and you celebrated it." Danielle's voice finally broke through, barely audible. "I didn't think anyone important would see." Margaret didn't blink. "You're right," she said. "You didn't." And with that, Danielle Foster, the once proud manager of one of the most profitable stores in the chain, was walked out the front doors without fanfare, without her name tag, and without a single person on staff meeting her eyes. Her fall wasn't just public, it was permanent. Back inside, Margaret stepped toward the front counter. She rested her hands on the surface that had, just hours before, been used to mock her wallet, her appearance, her supposed station. Then she spoke to everyone still in earshot. Staff, security, and a few bystanders who hadn't yet been escorted out. "This store will reopen," she said. "But not as it was. Not under this leadership, not under this culture. Store number 89 will undergo a complete transformation. Every policy will be rewritten. Every employee will be retrained. Every assumption you made today, about wealth, about dignity, about who belongs, will be examined and torn down if necessary." She paused, letting her words sink in. Because if luxury costs someone their humanity, then it's not luxury at all. It's just ugliness dressed in silk. Sarah Chen stepped forward again, flipping through a folder. "We've scheduled immediate bias training for regional leadership. All 900 stores. Mandatory, no exceptions." Rachel Dorsey added, "We're developing a new employee code of conduct, not for marketing, but for meaning. It will include a clause we're calling the Margaret Clause, a line reminding staff that you never know who you're speaking to. So treat everyone as if they own the place. Because one day they just might." Margaret nodded slowly, finally allowing herself the briefest smile. It wasn't satisfaction. It was resolution. Her voice, though quiet, rang out once more. "This wasn't just about me. It was about every child who's been followed in a store, every mother who's been judged by her shoes, every father who's been asked to step aside because he doesn't look like he belongs." She placed her hand gently over her heart. Today was ugly, but tomorrow doesn't have to be. And just like that she turned, her heels echoing one last time across the now empty boutique floor. She didn't look back, she didn't need to, because the consequences had already taken root. And the fall? It was no longer just Danielle's. It belonged to every person who had forgotten what it meant to be human in the pursuit of looking powerful. And from this collapse, a new culture would rise, one founded not on silk, champagne, or brand loyalty, but on respect, empathy, and truth. The lights of store number 89 remained off for 3 full weeks. In that time, headlines circled the nation, from morning news segments to primetime interviews. Social media ignited with a single clip, Danielle Foster slapping a woman she believed to be a poor, aimless shopper, only to learn she had struck the billionaire founder of the very company that signed her paychecks. The footage went viral in less than 4 hours. Margaret Ellis's face became the emblem of quiet strength and overdue justice. But it wasn't fame she was after. It never had been. In the days that followed the incident, Margaret didn't vanish behind legal teams or PR shields. She stood firm, giving interviews, answering questions, and most importantly, listening to stories that poured in from strangers. Letters arrived in stacks. Emails flooded the Ellis Emporium inbox. People, thousands of them, shared tales of mistreatment in stores, offices, restaurants, and even hospitals. Stories that all shared one haunting refrain. They looked at me and decided I didn't belong. Margaret read everyone, and then she acted. She launched the Ellis Standard, a new nationwide initiative that rewrote the playbook on retail conduct. It included mandatory bias and empathy training for all 50,000 employees across her 900-plus stores. It mandated anonymous complaint hotlines managed by third-party teams. And perhaps most revolutionary of all, it introduced a corporate policy known internally as the Mirror Rule. The rule was simple. Treat every person who walks through our doors as if they were your boss, your mentor, or your grandmother. Because one day they just might be. But Margaret didn't stop there. She established a new scholarship fund, the Walk-In Grace Initiative, aimed at helping underrepresented students enter business and fashion management fields. The first grant went to a young woman in Chicago named Kayla, who had once been removed from a different boutique for asking about a prom dress she clearly couldn't afford. Now, Kayla would attend New York University's business program, tuition fully covered. The store where it all began reopened under new management. The layout changed, the staff changed, even the lighting changed. But most importantly, the culture changed. The new store director was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s named Lynette Carter, who had spent 2 decades working in community retail outreach. Margaret personally mentored her for the role. Danielle Foster, meanwhile, disappeared from the public eye. Her name became a cautionary tale in corporate training manuals. Not out of vengeance, but out of memory. Because what you do when you think no one's watching tells the truth about who you are. Amber Davis eventually reached out to Margaret with a handwritten letter. She apologized not for losing her job, but for losing her integrity. Margaret wrote back. She encouraged Amber to enroll in a local program for social justice and retail ethics. Last anyone heard, Amber was working at a nonprofit dedicated to improving hiring practices for women of color in the service industry. Angela Ruiz, the single mother who had stayed silent, received a severance package larger than expected. Not as a reward, but as a lesson. Margaret believed in second chances. Angela used the money to go back to school, and later became a caseworker for housing insecure families in the South Side. In time, the story faded from the headlines. But it didn't fade from people's hearts. Because Margaret Ellis didn't just punish cruelty, she transformed it. She reminded the country that dignity doesn't wear designer clothes, that kindness should never be conditional, and that no job, no brand, and no label gives anyone the right to tear another person down. In her final public interview on the incident, Margaret was asked why she hadn't revealed herself earlier, why she let it all unfold when she could have ended it with a single name drop. Her response was simple. Because I wanted to see what they'd do when they thought I was nobody. and now, so do they. And in that silence, something shifted. Not just in that store, but in every store, in every city, in every soul that saw themselves in her calm resistance and unwavering power. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reckoning and rebirth. Have you ever been judged by how you looked, what you wore, or where you came from? Margaret Ellis's story reminds us that true strength doesn't shout. It stands tall in silence. If this video moved you, if it made you think twice about how we treat others, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share your own story in the comments. We read every single one. Let's build a community where respect comes first, no matter what. Turn on the bell icon so you never miss a powerful story that just might change your life.